From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joel Mitchell. How are you today, Joel?
I'm all right, Jason. I don't know if I have anything interesting to talk about this morning. Do you have anything interesting to talk about?
My daughter is an absolute superstar when it comes to cross-country, apparently.
Oh.
Yeah, so she had a cross-country 1,500 metres. She's 7 years old. Ran it all the way through, won by about 400 metres.
Wow.
Yeah.
She's tall though, isn't she?
No, she isn't. This is the normal size one. I mean, she's tall in comparison to you, but so is most people.
Yeah, that's way to punch down, Jason.
Well, I can't punch up to you. Can I?
We'll see about that.
We've established that. But yeah, no. So she's pretty amazing. So look, I think I've talked about on the podcast before how my weekends are just crazy.
Sports.
Yeah. I mean, on Saturday we had 7 events in the family that we had to get our 3 kids to.
I can't even imagine trying that.
Yeah, so I usually come to work on a Monday and I just kind of like fall in a heap and spend the week trying to recover for the next weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you thought about dialing it back maybe?
I have, and the discussion may have come up at home as well, saying we're probably doing too much, but my wife wouldn't have it any other way. And, you know, when we're in the thick of it on a Saturday, it's kind of like, yeah, this is pretty cool. So, Jess and I are both quite sporty, or have been historically. So it's nice now to live vicariously through our kids.
Are you one of those dads that gets exited from the sidelines for being too aggressive?
No, but funnily, my wife is from a family like that. And so, in fact, my 2 daughters both get to play with 2 cousins in their basketball team. It's just worked out really nicely. And there has been times when Jess's brother has been confronted by either a ref supervisor, because he coaches one of the teams, or even as a spectator, they had someone come up to her and say, hey, look, here's our policy around crowd behaviour and parent behaviour. So, I'm actually really chill in comparison to a lot of parents, I think. But Jess definitely comes from a family that takes it way too seriously.
Yeah, I mean, because, you are a little bit competitive.
I am a little bit, but I don't live completely vicariously through my kids. I love seeing them successful, but yeah, my self-esteem isn't wrapped up in my kids' ability to compete in under-10s basketball.
That's probably healthy.
Yeah, I'd say it is. So it's largely unhealthy to, have really high blood pressure and get really angry when it's not going your way in under-10s.
Or just any time.
Did I tell you once, Riley was playing Aussie rules and in, what's it called again? Auskick. And it was like under-10s. And one of the opposition team got escorted off the field for punching one of our kids, like under-10s, right?
One of the kids or one of the parents?
No, one of the kids. Right. So one of the kids got escorted off the field, got red carded, taken off the field. And as the umpire was escorting the kid to the bench, a mum from the other team came out and started assaulting the umpire. It made the news. Even the Premier was talking about it. Yeah.
A mum from the team of the kid who was escorted off?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, the opposition team. It wasn't our team.
Yeah.
Yeah. I managed to catch some video right at the very end. But
was she his mum?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Right.
Yeah.
Well.
So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's sports is crazy, man. But
kids sports is crazy. I'm quite glad that my son isn't really into team sports.
Yeah, parkour and ninja stuff.
Yeah, which is we go to like the group lessons, but it's not a competitive type of an environment, so that's good.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, our guest has been patiently waiting. Should probably bring him in. Yeah.
Yep.
So he is a self-described wellbeing smuggler. We'll have to ask him what that means. Jargon cutter, systems wrangler, and C-suite whisperer. His former role, however, is I think I said former.
You did. No, it's not his former role.
No, his current role, and it's his formal role, is company director at Allos Australia. Welcome to the podcast, Antony Malmo.
G'day. Hi, Joel. G'day, Jason.
Great to have you on, Anthony. It's been a long time coming. We've been wanting to have you on for a while, and glad that you finally got some people back into the office so that you've got some time to chat with us.
Yeah, it's a nice break. It's nice, takes the pressure off. So that's always nice to be able to hand off some responsibilities to some other people again. So it's good.
Yeah. Now, Joel and I have had a very strong coffee this morning because I put you up along the likes of Richard Clayton and Wade Needham, both previous guests of ours who are very intellectual. And so we need all the caffeine we can just to keep pace, I think, with you today. So we're looking forward to this intellectual conversation, no doubt.
No pressure.
We'll keep it. We'll try and keep it as informal as possible, hopefully. So there we go.
Yeah, don't make us look silly.
We do that ourselves, Jason.
Yeah, true. We don't need help with that.
So before we do get to intellectual, Anthony, what podcast do you like to listen to?
By far, my favourite this year was the discovery of The Great Simplification with Nate Hagens. He's an energy guy. He does energy systems, so the energy that fossil fuels and solar, everything that supports our civilization. And he looks into how it all connects with geopolitics, mental health, ecology, economics, and he has on a whole bunch of smart people. It's fascinating because it really shows what's coming down the pipeline for us in the next few years and decades. And so, it's not for the faint of heart, but it's good to be informed, right? The other one is the great, John Vervaeke. He's a cognitive scientist out of somewhere in the US. It's called the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And I've really enjoyed that one too, because he's a cognitive scientist, like I said, and he goes through all of Eastern thought, the development of Eastern thought over time, Western thought, shamanic thought, and he's explaining why spirituality, what it is, why it matters, and how we can develop in our own lives without religion, which if you're a non-religious heathen like me, that's kind of helpful. And I think it's fascinating because we do know now that there's a lot of lack of meaning and purpose in people's lives these days, a lot of nihilism. And so I find this quite interesting. It's kind of like science-based hope is how I think of it. So that's a good one. And my other one that I listen to most nights as I'm drifting off to bed is The Other Others, which is by Tyson Yunkaporta. He heads up Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab at Deakin University, and he's been north, south, east, west across Australia finding Indigenous knowledge systems and trying to collate all the wisdom that's within them, but relating it to complexity and relating it to systems thinking. But the best thing about it is it's totally unpretentious, and it's just like a campfire chat. And so it's really interesting. And the other thing that's really amazing about it is that you're getting people who are big thinkers in the complexity space now looking at Indigenous knowledge here in Australia and saying, "Oh wow, okay, this is very, very useful." So yeah, that's my third one.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's
very intellectual.
It's on brand for
It is very on
yeah.
brand. Yeah, very on brand. I haven't heard of any of those, but I'll be giving some of them.
I also listen to
sure.
the Dollop if it's any consolation, which is just historical hilarity. So yeah.
Well, we do all need a bit of dumb funny in our lives, don't we?
Yes, we do.
All right, so let's go into your professional career, please.
All right, so if you permit me, I'll go on a little bit of a tangent here. I've graduated uni after studying psych and biology, ecology, a bunch of other things. I realised I wasn't made for lab work. All I ever really wanted to be was like Sir David Attenborough and get out to the Amazon. And so I figured that education would be my ticket to the world. So I got into education, bought a one-way ticket, flew to Vietnam back in the early 2000s, and focused on adult education. And I kind of learned two lessons there early on. One was I ended up working with an oil exec, Miss Hung, and she up until that point, I kind of always thought of business as kind of like just the soulless pursuit of money. But she helped me realise that it's actually a lot more to do with group psychology, right? Getting a whole bunch of people together to do something. So once I kind of understood that, I started to get a real passion for it. The other thing I learned there is I was working with I just volunteered with an orphanage, right, and just getting for street kids. And about 3 months in, I had this bigwig lady who's in international aid come over and give us a lecture. And she said, "Hey, all you foreigners, I know you think you're doing well. I know you think you're really helping around here, but can you stop trying to be friends with the kids? Because let's be honest, 6, 12, 18 months from now, you're going to go. And these kids already have abandonment issues, so you're just going to be re-traumatising them. If you really want to help around here, figure out how you can bring in resources and bring in money to this organisation so that we can support these kids better and leave the emotional attachment to the actual locals who are here, are going to be here long term." And I was like, okay. So took her advice on board, and we put together this little marketing thing, or this little collaboration with all the cafes around town. That was Saigon, like Ho Chi Minh City, to get a bit of coin off the top of every cafe, every coffee that was bought. And I never saw the kids. I used to never say, just come in the back door every day. But the interesting thing is that like 12 months later, we had a whole room, about 20 computers and teachers who could teach them how to do computer skills and graphic design and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, that's it was a real light bulb moment for me, because it's like sometimes the thing that feels good isn't the best thing for people, and also it also shows that sometimes doing the quiet systemic work behind the scenes can have a profoundly more powerful impact on people. You just got to deal with the fact that you're not going to get any accolades, and there's no high fives from people every day. But it is an opportunity to make some real difference. After that, I moved to South America because I was trying to get to the Amazon. You see, I ended up in Colombia because I fell in love with Colombia. I fell in love with the people. Fell in love in Colombia. Got married. Started my business. The whole 9 yards. And that's when I had my second kind of aha moment. I was working with a company called ABB. They're the big engineering company, right? They do engineering and robotics and all that. And I was working with their exec team, and specifically with one guy, Francisco Ramos. And he told me this story, like 7 years prior, they'd almost been shut down for poor quality. So he was he was the safety quality manager. And he said 7 years prior, they'd almost been shut down for poor performance. And I said, all right. I go, where are you now? And he's like, oh, now we're like second in the world. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, how'd you do it? And I was expecting him to kind of provide, some kind of super tool, right? Some kind of spreadsheet that'll fix it all, right? And he goes, actually, Anthony, empathy. And I was like, what? He goes, empathy. And so he unpacked the idea for me. But for me, that was a real head spin, because up until that point, like I was very much a sciencey, facts and figures kind of person. And I kind of thought that emotions and these intangible things are invisible. These invisible things we should actually try and get rid of, right? Because they're kind of noise that gets in the way of logical thought and clear action and communication. So that was a real mind opener for me. And then that kind of set the tone for the next 10 years. While I was there, I was working with banks and manufacturing and a whole bunch of different industries, essentially asking the question like what makes work suck and what makes it not suck, and how do we make this, how do we improve things? So I got to work with hundreds of people over those years. Nevertheless, what I was ignorant to was my own energy, so to speak. I was burning out, but I didn't notice it. I kind of, call me young, dumb. I thought I was invincible, but my mental health just fell in a heap. I was burning out hard. Marriage fell in a heap. Life fell in a heap. I felt, I found myself in a feeling just really trapped and no real sense of hope. And it took me forever to find a psychologist, right? And especially one that was a bit bilingual, because my Spanish is okay, but I needed someone bilingual. But it took forever. There was no support inside the organisation that I was working with, none of that. I finally got a session. It was about the third session in, and she goes to me, you realise you've got options, right? And I was like, what options? Because I just felt absolutely trapped by my situation. She goes, well, you could get divorced. You could wrap up your business. You could sell everything up and move back to Australia. And I'd never thought of that. And it really was a real eye-opener for me, because it just showed that, like, when you're burned out, when you're stressed, you just tunnel vision, you know? You can't see the options that are available to you. And you're just not, like, I was not fully, I didn't have my whole brain. That's how I think of it. Like, I just was not functioning well. And it was filtering out into all my life and ruining everything around me. So took that advice as well. You know, that was a hard decision to get divorced and wind up the business and come back to Australia. But when I came back, it got me really thinking around this role of mental health inside of organisations. And I'm sitting there going, wouldn't it be awesome if employers somehow provided a mental health service inside of their organisations to support their employees, to save them all this untold suffering, lost productivity, and everything that comes with it? And then someone told me, yeah, it's called an EAP. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, and about the same time I met my current business partner, Adam, and he was starting an EAP. And I was talking with him about it. And I said, this sounds amazing. He goes, well, it should be, but often it's not. Utilisation rates are low. People don't typically use them very much. When they do use them, they're very late. They seem to be set up to be very reactive. And they seem to have a bit of a ho-hum reputation about things. So I want to do things different. And sign me up. So the first 2 years of that was really figuring out, like, what stops people from using, EAPs, right? And what are the roadblocks? And we figured out that and removed those. And we saw, like, usage rates went fourfold, right? Like 4 times the industry average. And we were like, and for us, that was really important, because, like, people do want support. If you give them good support, they will use it, but you've got to understand why they're not using it and remove those blockages. And so that was stage 1. And then stage 2 here at Allos was like, okay, why do people need to go to therapy to learn the lessons to not end up in therapy? Surely we could deliver this en masse. I mean, a lot of these lessons and things are available, are understandable. It's not rocket science. They're useful tips, especially like the CBT stuff. It's real logical. It's like, okay. So we started doing a lot of training and education, and that was doing well. That was probably the next 2 years. And then we kept on running into all these, like, little invisible barriers inside of organisations. And I remember this one conversation. I remember when it kind of clicked in my head. Guy goes, mate, what you're saying is great around here, but around here we can't do that. And we're like, and then you find out, actually, you know, there's issues around culture, there's issues around policy, there's all these invisible things that are preventing people from even being able to make good decisions. And that was about the time, it was about 2017, so it was about the same time as the psych health safety stuff was bubbling up, right? So I looked over, and at that stage I was already listening a lot to Kevin Jones and reading a lot of his work, and I looked over and I met up with Dr. Rebecca McCallick. And so, you know, once I met those two, I was like, the things went off in my head. I was like, okay, I get it now. All right. And I looked over the fence into safety, and I saw in safety you got flowcharts and you got diagrams, you got pyramids and all of these things. I'm like, these are my people. And I thought, this is it. These guys have the solution. This is the plan. And so that's what kind of brings us where we are today. Although, you know, I will say, like, the more time I've spent around safety, I realise it's actually quite divided, and there's a lot of complications in there and a lot of drama as well. Science isn't as clear and as settled as they'd like us to believe, but nevertheless, I still, at a fundamental level, believe in the underlying logic of what's being offered. So that's kind of brought us today. Is like, okay, now we've got recovery through to all the way through to capacity building through to prevention. And that's kind of our whole model now at Allos, which brings us to this whole issue of where to next for psych health, safety, and where are we all going together?
So I quite like that story that you've told, Antony, because I think that it probably aligns with the journey that lots of organisations go on as well when they start thinking about the mental health of their workforce and, yes, sort of starting to think about it as, well, how do we help them get treatment when they need it? And then thinking further back and saying, well, can we do some coaching with people and give them skills to, you know, better cope with their environment so that then don't get to the point where they need that professional help. And then even going the next step back and saying, well, what are the things that we're actually doing to our employees that might be actually causing distress or leading to mental illness? So, you sort of followed in your own mind and your career that same sort of process of maturing in understanding that a lot of organisations are going along at the moment as well.
Yeah, it's the logic. I mean, if you keep asking why, and I will say, like, I'm an outsider to this whole, I came in as an outsider to this whole space. And I think what that does is that in that you end up asking a lot of questions that, I want to say dumb questions, but let's say disarmingly simple questions. And what happens is you end up going, well, why won't people use it? Why won't this? And I think it inevitably leads you towards these kind of questions. So, yeah.
Yeah, terrific. It was a great story. But look, obviously the focus of today's conversation is probably where you wrapped up at the end of your conversation, starting to think about the health and safety elements, right? Mm. So as you've said, psych health and safety is relatively new. There's a lot of sense making still to come. So for people and organisations with the work immediately in front of them, particularly here in Australia, right, with incoming regulations, what do they need to pack for the journey, in your opinion?
An open mind and a hunger for learning. This is the more and more that you look into it, you start to realise this is going to be a very transdisciplinary field. And I think if you look across all of safety and HR and mental health professionals and all of this, I think all the requisite elements are there, but it's rare as hen's teeth, at least from what I've seen so far, is to find people who've got all of that wrapped up together. And what I mean by that is because people have been operating in silos for a long time, right? So safety knows risk, right? They've got their head around risk, which is great. But then you're also going to need the kind of the political savvy and the social savvy to handle the complexity of this as well. And I think that's kind of HR has been really good in that space. I think mental health professionals understand the wickedness of psychosocial issues. But then again, often they work at a one-to-one scale. They're not working at a big scale. So everyone's got strengths, everyone's got weaknesses. Let's call them blind spots. And so I think, what we need is we need all of these skills and a couple more. I mean, I think honestly, like if you want to look at it as a role model, I think Dr. Rebecca McCulloch is pretty much what you'd want to be aiming for in terms of a skill set. Background in psych. So she's got EQ, she understands the law, she has business acumen. I think that's one thing that's lacking in a lot of this. Is like everybody's like, how do I make, like they're all focused. One of the big issues that we all probably face sometimes is we get hooked on our little section of the business and we're like, oh, how do we make this work? And you're like, you got to look at things in the broader context. How's it working inside at an organizational level? Again, systemic thinking and an appreciation of that. And the last thing, ethics. That's the other thing I think is underrepresented in this area. We need Rebecca's strong on her opinions and all this, but underlying all of this is a strong sense of rock solid ethics on this. Now, in addition to that, I think there's one more element here, and I'd actually point to Warren Black. He's a safety guy. He works in the complexity space and systems thinking space inside of safety and risk. He does an amazing work on this. I don't know anyone else who's really operating at his level, but I always go to his work. So if I could, I would have some kind of like love child of like Rebecca McCulloch and Warren Black, and it would be our psych, health and safety super soldier. One last thing. Storytelling, or at least the ability to persuade. A lot of the time I talk with HR and safety people, and there's this real sense of deep frustration that they don't get they're not seen with enough credibility by their people higher up. They have trouble getting people behind their ideas, and they always feel like they're pushing things uphill and nobody gets them. I know from my own personal experience, I used to be the kind of person that if you disagreed with me, I'd go off and go get the research and I'd print it out and I'd dump it on your table and I'd go, read that, see, now come back and talk to me. It never, ever worked, right? It's not how you persuade people. We are narrative-driven creatures, and you need to understand the science of storytelling and persuasion. And there's a book called The Science of Storytelling. I think that's the name. Will Storr. What I'm saying is we need to have the ability to know how to tell things in a way that change the stories in people's heads, because people are loyal to their stories and their mental models, which I should also, that probably segues well. We're very good at telling people what the technical skills are, and I guess I've kind of done that. At the moment, the thing that I'm thinking more and more about is kind of the mental models and all the assumptions about how the world works that people bring with them into this space, because the mental models you have in your head about how you assume the world works influence how you perceive situations and scenarios, and it also blinds you to things. And so the question is not which one is right. The question is, do you have enough of them, enough so that you can pick and choose the right mental model, because all models are wrong, but some are useful, to match them to the situation that you're dealing with. And I think right now, my concern is that, and I've discovered that I'm not alone after I put out that post on LinkedIn, is that there are other people in the psych, health and safety space who are very concerned that we are taking a mechanical reductionistic approach to trying to try and deal with psychological or psychosocial issues, which are actually quite wicked and complex. So,
yeah, you paint a pretty tough picture, I think, for organisations. It's a very narrow target to hit if you're trying to say, and look, I don't know Warren Black, but I know that Beck is happily married with a couple of kids. So
yeah, we're not going to get a love child out of those two.
Yeah, so
don't want to get into the career of home record.
We would have to wait.
We'd have to wait till they got to an age where they could enter the workforce and contribute. And there's obviously the nature nurture stuff as well.
There is. I will let her know immediately after this that she can pay you for the endorsement, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just say that's out of the question.
Yeah.
So clearly then, if we can't get a single person with all of that kind of breadth and knowledge of skill, plus all the EQ and the ability to influence and all of that sort of stuff that you're mentioning, I guess collaboration is the only other thing, right?
We Captain Planet it.
Yeah. There is no Captain Planet, but we can have all the Planeteers.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're totally on point, and well done, because that's like exactly what's said about dealing with complexity space or dealing with wicked problems is that having these individual hero experts and relying entirely upon them, it'll blow up in your face, because the challenges that you deal with are so unique and evolving, and they involve so many stakeholders that you actually need to have shared sense making across from as many stakeholders as possible, really, to be able to navigate that space.
I mean, I find even in our own business, right, we have obviously psychologists who are subject matter experts in the field of psych health and safety. But now we also are adding more people who've got more commercial experience, management consulting experience. And, you know, we're finding that's actually a really great way to talk to businesses because we can talk in their language and also then meet people where they need with the subject matter expertise as well. Another thing, though, that you mentioned, Anthony, which I thought was worthwhile following up a little bit on was about the mental models. We definitely see it in psychology. You know, if you're providing a service to workplaces and you come from a discipline of, say, clinical psychology or organizational psychology or even positive psychology, you'll come in with your own kind of mental models about how the world works and how you can apply psychology within that context. And you often see people who've, you know, they've done their map in positive psychology. They go into every problem in a workplace looking like it's a nail, right? They've got a hammer. You know, they're going to use things like PERMA and they're going to look at acts of kindness and gratitude and mindfulness and all this sort of stuff. And that's how they're going to deal with the problem. You look at clean psychs, you know, they're very interested at that individual level of identifying those people who are struggling and getting them support. And then you've got the org psychs who take more of a systems kind of approach. But not one of those is right. Like you say, they're all wrong. But there's probably a lot of truths in all of them that if we mash together, we can actually probably have a greater impact.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and it's also like finance. Like if you go, like my best friend is economics and finance, right? And everything boils down to incentives and zero-sum games. Like it's all game theory, right? And it's quite a cynical way to look at the world. It's like everyone's out for their own. It's like you're constantly in this eternal prisoner's dilemma. Yeah, and so you're right. Like whatever we, you know, we all grew up, we all have these things, and whatever we grew up with and studied in, it really shapes us and how we think, and we have to strive to go out beyond our zone of familiarity on this stuff, and not even just say, oh, I listen to other people, you know, I'm prepared to, you know, take other people's perspectives. That's not enough if you want to succeed in this space, I don't think. I think if you want to succeed in this space, you've got to be actively seeking models and ways of thinking that challenge how you think and get off the black or white and get off your high horse and get off all of these things. Because, and here's the thing, when you're stressed out, and we all are, we're all overwhelmed, you know, because it's just a lot going on, you default back to these simplistic models. And this is the problem when we're heading into the wicked space, is oversimplification.
Yeah, and that we're not even going to touch safety 1, safety 2, safety differently today.
Oh. No.
Over to you, Joel.
No. All right. So let's talk more about this psych health and safety as a wicked problem. I think, yeah, that there will be a listenership who understand what you mean when you use that term wicked problem. But for those who don't, could you give or expand on what that really means?
Yeah. So it's been around for a while. This, I think, since the 70s. But you've got, essentially, if you can divide the world up into, you've got tame problems and you've got wicked problems. Now, tame problems are the ones we're used to. They're the ones where maybe you've got a problem wrong with a mechanical system or a technological system in your business. You go in there and you say, all right, you bring in an expert typically, you find out what the cause of the problem is, replace the part, fix the code, whatever it is, job done, walk away. That's a tame problem. And now they can be really complicated. Like it could be, you know, a big, I don't know, maybe it's a big piece of machinery or a car with thousands of pieces. But at the end of the day, all the parts are known and you can follow a logical process of deduction to figure out what is the root cause of this. And then once you fix that problem, it's done. It's over. And that's very different to a wicked problem. Wicked problem is essentially the opposite of all of that. A good example of that, the way I think of it is just like massively entangled, moving all the time. It's a giant moving target with lots of different competing interests involved. So good example of this that we've all lived through was like COVID and the COVID response, right? It was tough because we was trying to figure out where's it all come from, where's the cause and effect. It seems to be affecting some people differently to others. And then we're like, well, what will we do? Well, we'll lock everyone down. And then people like Sweden like, no, let everyone run around. We'll try the free range approach. And then China's like, lock it down. And Victoria and Australia, we locked down a lot. And went back and forth and back and forth. So there's different. It's very difficult to figure out the cause, like all the different domino effects that take place inside the system. The other thing then is like all the different people that are involved, different opinions, and people have competing interests. And so, there were experts on both sides, like PhDs from big universities saying one thing and saying the other. And so for us, the poor public, we're like, oh. And so that adds a lot of complexity to it and confusion. And then you've got people like, well, we've got to protect the economy. Like, just because you're going to save people, when you try and fix it in one area, does that harm the economy? And then you have other analysts coming and going, actually, no, by protecting the people, you save the economy and all this kind of stuff. But it's all up to it's beyond the comprehension of any of us individuals. So there's all these trade-offs. There's no perfect solutions. It's all really messy. And it's really political and complex. And the other thing there is that it doesn't really have an end point. One key thing about a wicked problem is it doesn't have a stop point. And so what that means is like with the car, once you fix the problem's gone. But with the wicked problem, it keeps evolving and changing. And as you try and change and try and solve the problem, that changes the nature of the problem. And so it's this, it's a big messy thing. And here we are, 2.5 years later, and now we've got different versions and all of this. So that's kind of, I think, hopefully something that people can kind of wrap their heads around, gives them a good working example. And then how it relates to psychological health and safety is cause and effect. Most of these situations, most psychosocial issues have a mixture of work and non-work, personal and public. They're multi-causal. And also they're effective. Get this, like the effectiveness of your intervention is actually up to the perception of the people doing it. Right now, if I can go fix a car, you fix a car, it doesn't matter what people think because it's an objective, verifiable external object. But when it's our internal world, it's as much about how people perceive it, which is quite interesting. Then you've got issues like trying to get consensus on things, like what's the right approach? And some people are going to say, you're just going to get it. It's just difficult to get everybody on the same page agreeing that this is the right solution to the right problem because everyone perceives the thing differently. For example, for me, like loneliness is a good example, or isolation, because we all have different tolerances for isolation and need for others. So that's a tough one.
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell's got some strong thoughts on that one.
I'm not going to get into Gladwell's latest. I'm sure he wrote that from a coffee shop. So anyway, yeah, don't worry, Richard Clayton, Dr. Richard Clayton's already gone to town on that. So what else have we got? As you try and intervene, it changes the nature of the problem as well. And so, I think this is the problem: is that I think there's too many people thinking that we're going to go in there and like engineer suffering out of organisations, and it won't work like that. It's the wrong model for the wrong problem, and as a consequence, what we're going to see is that things will always be evolving and changing and going on. And it's not to say it's impossible. It's not. There are things you can do, right? And I would say wicked problems is one way of thinking about this, but another model that it's my fave in this space, and that's the Cynefin framework, Cynefin. Hard to pronounce, hard to remember, but it's by a guy called Dave Snowden. It's taught in a lot of MBAs and it's used by US military uses it. It's very, very popular. But if people are interested, I'd recommend they go and check that out and start diving in, mainly because I think it provides actionable steps that you can take to navigate these spaces, because otherwise it all gets a little bit overwhelming and paralysing.
Yeah, I mean, the complexity is definitely real. And one of the ones that we've observed and something that we've noticed you observe the same thing is, what is a hazard for one person is actually stimulating for another. So there are these personal factors or personal preferences, I guess, which are confounding variables when you consider psych health and safety. So how do we reconcile that, and how do companies approach that, do you think?
Well, I was going to throw that question back to you because that's the bit I haven't figured out yet. You guys have all the smart models and technology. I mean, you like I was looking at the ISO, right, the 45003, and I'm like, okay, so recognition and reward. I'm like, okay, well, sometimes putting a monthly poster up on the board saying, monthly employee, that can lead to, that makes people feel awkward and they don't like that. And other people are like, yeah, look at me. Stability and respect, trust and fairness. Like, I used to work in cross-cultural communication, right? And it's like, man, holding eye contact for too long is intimidating between cultures, right? So there's all these weird little granular variability that I don't know how we can control. So I don't know. You guys tell me. What's the plan?
Yeah, so definitely agree, and definitely when we're talking about psychosocial risk assessment, we definitely feel like the old models don't work. I don't think they were ever designed to measure risk. They were designed to, like, I'm talking about these surveys, right? These academic surveys that look at factors like workload and autonomy and role clarity and that sort of thing. They were there to describe the nature of work. They weren't there to help us describe the risk associated with work design. And so really we need to be asking individuals, is this a stressor for you, or is this having a negative impact on your well-being? So changing how we frame questions, I think, is really important. Mm-hmm. But then what I always say to people is, because we have to, again, change the mental models that people are coming from. Mm. They're like, okay, we need to find the people who are struggling with workload, and then we need to support them at an individual level. I'm like, no, the psych health and safety approach is more systems thinking, right? So let's try and find where we have a number of people who actually have the same negative perception of that factor, or it's having a negative impact on them. And then let's think of a systemic control in order to be able to deal with that higher upstream.
Yeah.
Because if all you're doing is trying to find individuals who aren't coping, you're just going to be playing whack-a-mole all the time, because, like you say, it's a wicked problem, so it's going to change all the time, and you're just going to be trying to find the individuals and try and deal with them individually. So I think, first of all, we go, well, biggest bang for buck is let's think about where there's a group of people who have the same negative experience, and let's try and come up with a system that will deal with that. But then at the individual level, then let's encourage them to practice job crafting, and then bring our leaders along, line managers in particular, along the way, so they understand how they can help individuals job craft to meet, I guess, their ideal preferences for how they work. So that's one of the things that we have been thinking about.
That's smart, man. That's smart, because it is. It's like that 80-20 rule, right? It's the Pareto principle. You're trying to figure out, you're not going to get everyone, but if you can, get the biggest impact with the smallest, it's finding leverage points, really, and you're trying to find constellations of people who are being impacted the most, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's dramatically better. So again, it's like that. It's almost like do you know what makes me think? This is almost like epidemiology, and you know what? That's a conversation I never really hear a lot in the safety space. But to me, that epidemiological lens, because to me, isn't this has a lot of correlations with looking at okay, what are the large drivers of illness and inside of a population, and then how do we figure out where are the leverage points? So maybe that's another area we should be promoting people to kind of have a little look in. And job crafting, by the way, that's the. Sorry, go.
No, you go. Sorry,
I just wanted to.
I'm really struggling today.
It's just what I was going to confirm with you, exactly, and I've heard that Wade Needham actually pointed at that, the importance of job crafting. It's going to be can no longer just be left to HR and all the rest. It has to be involved throughout an organisation and really figure out how to have those conversations. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, and that's a gap, because you find organisations, they don't want to do the investment of time into their line managers to equip them with knowledge of this and how to have those conversations with employees about how to structure their jobs that is going to be most suitable for them. But it's a necessary investment, and then that's an investment where you could calculate an ROI very easily. I feel, by retention and improved productivity by the employee by meeting them where they're at. So I think it's an opportunity that is there for the taking. It's just about whether organisations are willing to make that initial investment in upskilling people to be able to do it correctly.
Great.
I think the other, so talking about the epidemiology perspective, I think that the other really big benefit that organisations can get from that is by focusing on those groups that are at the greatest risk or experiencing the greatest level of distress, you can be very pointed with your interventions. If we're looking at, sort of global type interventions, they tend to be quite blunt and not overly effective. But if you can actually key or hone in on, where are the big pain points in our organization, and let's actually really understand what's happening in that cohort. What are the triggers that are causing these hazards to manifest, if you like, then we can be very targeted in our interventions. So we've got a lot of efficiency potentially there by doing that extra work up front to really understand the problem, where we're going to be best placed to address it. And then we can actually have a bigger improvement for the people who need it the most.
And that is a problem that we see, right? So there's still this mental model, if you like, from HR, where they go, oh, we use an employee engagement survey to kind of understand how people are traveling and what they think about work. Not very good at understanding risk, right? But they go, well, we've got this data and we'll deal with this at a global level, bring in some training, or we'll do, some initiatives like Joelle is referring to as like global initiatives, rather than going, well, actually at a team level, and particularly given that a lot of psychosocial factors are interpersonal in nature, it's going to be very different from team to team.
Like
get
engagement.
A lot more bang for buck. Yeah.
No,
so
like engagement. If they're sorry, just pinged a little memory in my head. Like, we deal a lot, like with our EAP support. We, for whatever reason, we've turned out to be the EAP that takes care of companies that require care. So caring, compassion, fatigue, vicarious trauma, this kind of stuff. So healthcare and aged care and all of this. And what we find is that when you look into the research on that, is that people who are mission driven in what they do, engagement can actually be an indicator of increasing burnout. Because as their personal life falls apart, they're so dedicated. That's the one thing they never give. They never give up on, and so they double down on their work, and so they're doing the longer hours and they're doing the extra space, and they're actually just. And in talking with it, I haven't found solid research on this yet, but in talking with lots of aged care and healthcare and all the rest, that's what I start to hear. These are the stories I hear. Is they're like, they were our best worker and they were doing great, and then one day, boom, they popped and they never came back, and it's just like, So again, like, engagement, you think it's a good thing, but it depends on the context is everything in this kind of situation.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that is something that companies get into or understand more and mature, I guess, in their thinking. Engagement can drive short-term productivity, but it might have longer-term health implications for individuals, and increase the likelihood of things like burnout and then turnover as a result of that. So
we
see that in all mission based, or where people find the occupation a calling. Like teaching is another one, right? It's not a direct helping profession, but you hear teachers often going above and beyond, right? Yeah.
100%. Yeah, and you touched on something there about like sophistication of like where organisations are going. Like, one thing I probably should point out is like the risk of metric fixation, and here's why. So many organisations, people, they're just hooked on dashboards and they want metrics. I get it. The problem is that it's easier to get data on downstream reactive stuff. It's harder to get good metrics on upstream preventative stuff, right? It gets much more complicated because, again, it comes back to that issue of causation, right? And so what happens is that when, leadership says, well, I need numbers, I want all of this, you're actually incentivizing downstream activities because they're just easier, faster, and cheaper not cheaper in the long run, but easier and faster to provide data for. So again, I think we need a little bit of, until we have big databases like the stuff that you're building, and, like there's some other databases that are out there that are being built. Until we have that big data, I think pushing for people to provide the data is actually going to, unfortunately, push activities and focus downstream, not upstream. So, yeah, the tyranny of metrics.
And we've already seen that in the workplace mental health technology space. There's a lot of tools out there, and all they're designed to do is to measure if people are stressed, levels of depression, anxiety, symptoms. It's all this downstream stuff, but it doesn't then go, well, to what degree did work actually contribute to this? And then if we think about the workplace, what factors at work actually contributed? And, is this just the one individual who's had this negative reaction like we're talking about with individual preferences, or, is it a systems issue because it's actually having a negative impact on a number of individuals? So, that's definitely the gap that we've identified and what we're trying to address, that upstream data, but there is a plethora. You could, you could spit in the street and probably hit an app that would help you to determine if someone is stressed or not at work, which I don't think is entirely helpful, as you're alluding to.
We also shouldn't spit in the street, Jason.
No, I was trying to come up with a good analogy. I couldn't remember. What term would you use, Joelle?
I'd throw a stone.
Throw a stone. Yeah, that was what was going through my head as well.
Yeah, it's more hygienic.
It is more hygienic.
As long as you're not throwing it at a person, I think, or an animal, if you're just throwing it
indiscriminately, but you could inadvertently hit.
No, not indiscriminately. Look for a place where it's safe to throw a stone and then throw the stone.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I feel like we've got off track.
We have.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Anthony, thinking about, I guess, what we've spoken about so far, and it's been quite a lot. What would you say are the big implications for organisations and the employees within them when we're able to switch our thinking about psych health and safety from that, let's give employees lots of benefits to let's actually look at risk and how we can reduce exposure?
Well, for the HR and safety space, what I see is that it's an opportunity for an elevation of like status and credibility, because risk is the language of leadership, especially now. Risk is such a hot topic. And so what you're doing there is you're actually taking this thing that was always a bit weird and fuzzy and people didn't really know how to talk about, and you're putting it in a vocab and in a framework that is within their zone of familiarity. And people are like, okay, well, everything else we're doing is risk-based. So then, okay, we can plug this in. And so my hope is that will raise the credibility and get more airtime, so to speak, at the C-suite. The other part there is from an organizational perspective, if we get this right, it's going to reduce all the friction and all the sludge that sucks the life out of us at work sometimes. And in turn, that sucks the productivity out of organizations, right? I've lived it and I've seen it and I see it a lot. It's what we deal with a lot. And at the same time, then what happens is it sucks people out of organizations, right? And so right now, when you just have attrition rates just falling through attrition rates are going up, but people are just leaving businesses left, right, and center. I think this kind of more scientific, rigorous approach to figuring out systemic drivers could, if we get it right, allow businesses to run more efficiently and more humanely, and as a consequence, you get to be able to hold on to that talent and spend a whole lot less time dealing with people problems and headaches. And after spending a lot of time with, managers, that's a lot of what you deal with is just people problems, right, and headaches.
Yeah, now that's an interesting angle, because if we think about the direction that a lot of now what was the research that came out recently saying that CEOs with an MBA tended to approach revenue increases through putting pressure on salaries rather than through innovation. And so I think what you're talking about there is potentially another avenue other than either we stop giving pay raises or we need to come up with some fantastic innovation. This is potentially then a third pathway to improving revenue.
Yeah. So you've got productivity or efficiency, right? So productivity is like, how do we just add more and get more out of stuff? And efficiency is like, well, how do we remove all the or how do we streamline things in a way that allow us to get more out of what we've already got? And I think the current business models, to a degree, like they're pretty extractive. I mean, we do call it human resources, like natural resources. And the question has to be like, you know, at what point do we switch over from being sort of value extracting and value destroying into value creation? And I think, yeah, this is something that's coming up more. It's being forced upon organisations to kind of wake up and go, oh, actually, I thought we were getting more out of our people, but actually, are we? Because now we're losing people left, right, and centre. But we've got to wait for the economic models to kind of catch up. Because I don't know of anyone there's people who've tried to do that. Like what's Pfeffer? Pfeffer wrote like Dying for a Paycheck, and there's lots of research in this space. But let's be honest, it's just really hard to capture all those externalities in it to figure out, you know, productivity and ROI on people's work. But hopefully we'll get there, and hopefully this will be a big piece of the puzzle in terms of driving that forwards, by the way.
So, Anthony, you like to apply your mind to, you know, some of these wicked problems that we've been talking about. Have you thought about the field of psych health and safety and what it might look like in 3 to 5 years?
Yep. I have.
Okay.
I have.
Great.
I have
okay. Next question.
I have utopian dreams and I have dark nightmares. So the dark path is we oversimplify this. The dark path is we look at all this through engineering eyes and we assess the hazards and treat people like they're physical, like a construction, like a bridge or something. Right? It's under stress and pressure and they'll snap. Right. So these kind of mental models.
I can see, on that too, with that undersimplification, things like going for compliance, right? Particularly in Australia with incoming regulations, companies go, well, what do I need to be compliant and do the basic, right? And then they see no benefit. And then they're like, oh, this whole psych health and safety was a waste of time. Why is it regulated?
Exactly.
So I can see that. I can definitely see that as an unintended consequence, particularly of regulation. Like what's the minimum that we have to do?
Yeah, it's a bar, and it's both a high bar. It's a bar, but it can also be a low bar. And unfortunately, you know, when you make things an external, that's a really interesting point about the unfortunate side effect of compliance is that suddenly now it's a chore. It's like you're doing it for other people. It's an extrinsic motivator, and what we know is that once you get extrinsic motivators involved, intrinsic motivators, you're no longer doing it for yourself, right? They go out the window. And so then it becomes perfunctory, and then you kind of just do the bare minimum, which another way of thinking of it is that you're actually maximizing your risk to the law, if you think about it, right? Like you're actually taking the maximum amount of risk that you can without breaking the law. The real value in this stuff is going beyond. That's where the good ROI and having your heart in it. And that's what we notice amongst our clients is like, that's the only reason they can't, one of the key reasons is we end up working with them and vice versa is because we share that vision that we got to go beyond the bare minimum and the compliance. You've got to have your heart in it as well, because if you get all that right, it's a different game. It's a different game. And so I think that's that potentially is going back to your original question, like the dark side of things. Like that's how this could blow up. Is that? And Jennifer Lowe spoke about this. She had a because she's writing some of this. She's involved in some of the policy creation on this, and her fear was if we go down this WHS approach too heavily, which does seem to be happening because it's nice and simple and there's diagrams and there's flowcharts and all the things that make us feel confident and it makes it feel like it's a manageable problem. The problem is it's like the first half of the chessboard, second half of the chessboard problem. It's like it looks fine, and you come into an organisation, you go, hey everybody, here's your list of things that you need to do, and here's your map and here's your plan. It all seems quite manageable and simple. You give it to people. Consultants do this all the time, right? This is how organisations get hooked on consultants. And then initially everybody plays the first half of the chessboard because they're like, oh yeah, we do this. And you get this feeling like you're doing stuff and you're making good effort. And that's about the time when consultants go, yeah, cool, thanks, see you later, talk to you in 12 months. And what happens is that because the sense making was externalised from the organisation, someone else came in and kind of figured out how to make sense of the situation. It's not being done inside the organisation. because the nature of the world changes and you're dealing with this wicked problem that evolves and changes and it's this moving target, 6, 9, 12 months later, things are in disarray again. And then they're like, I'll call in another external expert to come in and clean up and fix our problem. And so my concern, and like you said before, like that second half of the chessboard where things get gritty and dirty, and that's going to be left to people inside the organisations. And if this goes wrong, like in chess, starting positions matter. And if we get our starting positions wrong on this, using wrong models, using wrong logic, what's going to happen is this is going to blow up. And you're going to have all these unintended complexities and problems emerge. People are going to have a bad experience. Organisations are going to have bad experiences. People are going to get harmed. It's going to damage the reputation of the whole effort, and probably set back this endeavour years and years, or reconcile it to the history books as another fad that didn't work. But it's two to tango kind of thing. So that's kind of
a lot of doom and gloom. Is there any upside,
yes.
Anthony?
yes. So here's how I'd like to see it. I'd like to see people getting out of their silos. I'd like to see, I imagine that there'd be less tribalism between departments on this. I'd like to see, as Warren Black said, I've got his quote here somewhere. Where is it? Like, only a collaborative control ecosystem can genuinely control complex, dynamic, system-dependent risks. And so a collaborative control ecosystem, I like that because I'm an ecosystem grad, so it's like, but that's a cool way of thinking about it. You've got a whole bunch of people throughout the organisation working together on this. And so, again, that internalising the sense-making inside the organisation. That's what we're big on. That's what we try and push, is like, we don't come in as like, we're the experts with the plan for you. It's like, come in, work within the organisation, help people find out what's going on and give them the tools to help them make sense of things together and work on things. And so that when we step away, like when we're not there, it's a sustainable it's a self-sustaining process of sense making within the organisation to tackle what's coming at them. And the other thing there, I guess, is I'd love to see, just again, it's a bit similar, but like a whole systemic approach on this, not like fragmented downstream or just upstream or anything, but across, up, down, left, right throughout organisations.
Yeah, and I think where we've got this, legislation framing psych health and safety as an OHS or a work health and safety duty, I think that we need to be really clear that that doesn't mean that your health and safety team owns the whole thing. Because where your interventions or controls are going to sit are going to be in all types of different management systems across the organisation. So, in the same way that your health and safety team might have ownership of the risk management process in saying, okay, this is when we need to do it, and now we're going to initiate it, and we might facilitate that process of identifying hazards and, assessing the risk associated with that. What comes out of that as how do we resolve this risk or how do we reduce the risk, that's not necessarily going to be owned by the health and safety team. So it might be that, we've got cracks in the foundation of this bridge, so we need to go and hand this over to the civil engineering team for the solution. And so exactly. From a psych health and safety perspective, well, what's the issue here? Is it that our performance management system is really opaque and nobody knows what's expected of them? Well, that goes back to potentially HR as the owner of the performance management system. Is it that our leaders are promoted for technical competency rather than people skills? And so that comes to potentially L&D, or, how are we actually developing our position descriptions for those leadership roles? How are we, doing assessment or whatever it is and development to get people into those roles? So while your health and safety team might own the risk management process, the point at which we need to actually do the sense making, as you've said, and come up with actions, I think that that's really where you need all of that collaboration from those different functional teams across the organisation to actually say, well, what's the sensible solution to this problem and who needs to take ownership of that? And I think that potentially that is where the OD function can really come into its own. And I think that function is oftentimes overlooked within organisations, but that OD, I think, is a lot of the time where that skill sits.
That's really interesting. It's like a nerve center, isn't it? It's like receiving input and then sending signals back out into the organisation or the organism to, adapt and control and tighten things up or loosen things up. Yeah, that's really interesting.
So I guess that leads us on to, do we need a new profession for this emerging phenomenon that we're grappling with?
So, I think something's going to come. Like, there's going to be a role that comes out of this. Like I said, like it's going to force people to be across. Whoever kind of wants to own these spaces inside of their organisations or do work externally, it's going to force you're going to have a toolkit, like I said, and so I guess the question is, do we kind of let that happen organically, or is there justification in maybe putting together a course on this, actually having a formal pathway for people to go into that? And then there's even, you could go, and what I mean by that is like, an actual course, like at a university course that specialises in this, that would then be certified and all the rest. Then going a step further and going down the path of something like having a real regulatory body. If you're a doc, like if we want to raise the credibility of this and raise the status of this kind of arena, like we are, let's be honest, you're working upstream and you're pulling big levers. Now, if you do the right thing, you get big, great positive impacts. You do the wrong thing, you have big, bad impacts. That's also the potential. So I feel like in that regard, is it not ethical, again, to go back to that, is it not ethical for us to have a level of professionalisation that goes along with that? Maybe it's a regulatory body akin to something like an APRA or like I know the people in finance have that, lawyers have that. And by the way, all your people at the top in your organisation, like 80% of company directors, I think it is, have a background in one of those, in accounting, like finance or law. And as a consequence, they come from high trust professions that, have a level of rigour and regulation about them. And so, sometimes people feel like they don't get the credibility from people upstairs inside their organisations. But the question then becomes, well, think about what they're looking at. They come from these highly regulated, highly trusted careers, fields, and they look at health and safety and all the rest, and they're like, well, you don't actually have that level of rigour. So I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't, but I'd be really interested if people want to throw in the chat and go mad. I want to hear all the different diverse opinions on this, because I think maybe this is a discussion that we need to have in the coming, months and years ahead.
Yeah, so I think that, is it that we need different, and I would assume it's a post-grad type of a bridging, a diploma or whatever that we would be talking about there. Mm. But then do we need different bridges for people coming from different disciplines? So, what's the bridge for a psych coming into this space? What's the bridge for your health and safety person coming in? What's the bridge for HR? There's basing on what is their existing mental model, to go back to what you were talking about before. Yeah. What else do they need to learn to be able to do this role effectively? And that gap is different for each of those professions.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good idea. Like you're gonna, exactly. Like, how do you kind of heat map the gaps in people's knowledge and then figure out how people can do the jigsaw? Because if you just had one,
if only you and Alicia had already started working on something like that, Joel.
Yeah. Ours probably isn't quite at the level of an
not
academic
quite
qualification.
postgrad, no. But I don't necessarily think we need that. I know
I think it's very early,
universities,
guys.
or at least one that I'm aware of, that's doing a microcert. So
Yeah. So I think that I guess why do we have qualifications in the first place? It's so that an employer can basically verify that yes, this person has been assessed by whoever has been decided is appropriate to assess this person, and say yes, they have the competencies that we need to be able to do this role. If we don't have some sort of verification of that, then, well, what is it left to? It's left to organisations to decide what groups of competencies they want to see in that role, and how effective or how competent are those organisations in actually understanding what's needed for that role. And some of them are probably perfectly well equipped to do that. I would imagine that lots of them are not. But that's ultimately why we have qualifications in the first place, is so that we don't have to understand all of that ourselves and assess every single individual ourselves.
Hey, and the other thing I'm just thinking is it adds a level of, like, all those bodies, those regulatory bodies, it gives you a real voice, like a lobbying voice at a senior level. So at a government level and what have you. So, there's that benefit as well. Like, if you want to get change going on inside of this space, that would be a powerful voice on behalf of the industry as well.
Yeah, and anybody who's had to deal with professional registration bodies will know that there are pros and cons associated with that, and so that's an interesting thing that we will be potentially grappling with.
Let's see where it takes us. We're not going to assume any outcomes, but I am interested to hear what people think about this.
Hey, Anthony, it's been a really stimulating conversation, as we did anticipate. But one of the questions we like to ask all of our guests towards the end of the podcast is, what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health? So you can think broader than just psych health and safety, but workplace mental health in general.
My hope is we build a big tent. I used that phrase. I heard it the other day and I used it. A lot of people like that phrase, like building a big tent for everyone to come in. My real concern at the moment is we're narrowing in quickly on these set ways of approaching this. And I think, let's bring more people in right now and get more voices at the table and let's expand it beyond safety and HR and who else wants to get in on this? Because I think, at this point, while we're still exploring the space and figuring it all out, having more voices at the table is useful for the sense making. You say go broader than this. I think you almost touched on it before, like as a nerve center for an organization to kind of sense and feel what's going on inside of all the, well, it's ambitious, but what's going on inside the minds and the souls of the people inside your organization. But you're picking that up. We're very good at picking up the tangible stuff. But what you're getting into here is getting into the intangible stuff, which we know, that was my experience back in the day, was this is the real stuff that drives organizations, or in its absence, organizations collapse in on themselves, right, without it. So what I'm thinking is that if you keep pushing this, it may force innovation in business models. And so I talked about before about like extractive business models and all the rest. So, we've been using a lot of this command. Look, when you're dealing with wicked problems, command and control structures don't really work really well. And a lot of our hierarchical command and control structures that we use throughout organizations, they've been around, like they're Taylorism. They're a century old and they kind of got matured after World War II. And you look around the world at the companies that are really doing well, and they seem to have this level of agility to them, and so they're kind of more decentralized. One that's fascinating is the white goods company Haier. They make like fridges and stuff. They have a business model called Rendan Haiyi. I can't pronounce it, but it's essentially like, well, it's unlike any other business I've ever seen. It's completely decentralized. And everyone's working in their own little micro businesses. And it's a wild new idea. And I'm not saying that's the best or everyone should do it, but the point being is if the world is getting faster and faster and more chaotic and more complex and all the rest, well, then maybe these command and control style approaches to running businesses are too rigid to handle the level of uncertainty and unpredictability and what's going on. So who knows, guys? You might be the driving force behind an evolution in how businesses operate.
Yeah, in our very small niche.
Yeah,
but we'd like to build a bigger tent and have more people in the community and more people like you, Antony, who are contributing to the conversation.
Yes, let's move it from a niche to a canyon.
Canyon.
There you go.
Yes.
Okay.
Antony, do you have words of advice for listeners who are currently thinking about how they might be able to work in psych health and safety?
So in terms of them being able to work in psych health and safety, like I said before, be curious in this space and be hungry for knowledge. Don't be afraid to ditch let go of the need to be an expert on everything and have all the answers. I think we're going to get a lot further in this space by being, let's be honest, a bit humble and curious and just passionate about things. And we will make mistakes, but we'll stumble through and just share knowledge.
Good advice. Don't be afraid to embrace what you don't know.
Yeah. Keep listening. Be curious. I like it. Hey, Antony, been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for finally finding the time. I know you're very busy running your own business and so on. So, really glad to have finally gotten you to contribute your voice to the discussion.
Well, thanks, mate. Well, look, I mean, I'll throw it out there. I mean, like we said before about people getting trapped on compliance, all the rest. If anybody if anybody's not happy with their EAP or they're a bit ho-hum about it and they like the sound of what we're talking about today, reach out to us at Allos Australia, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Let's have a chat. We can go on this journey together. So all the best.
Yep. And we definitely put you up there amongst the best.
Yeah.
So,
and we'll pop your webpage in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll share a bunch of resources too so people can go and deep dive and look at all this stuff in their own time.
Great. Awesome. So listeners, check out the show notes for lots of resources.
For a long list of hyperlinks.
Yeah. And be curious. No, thanks again, Antony.
Thank you, guys.
So listeners, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Remember, we do record these over video when we have the conversation with our amazing guests, so you can check those videos out on the Flourish DX YouTube channel. We also take some snippets from these conversations and put them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page. You've heard Antony's on LinkedIn, and if you aren't connected with him, I encourage you to do that. And the likes of Richard Clayton and Wade Needham, they all share very intellectually stimulating information. But then also, if you don't want as stimulating or intellectual information, then connect with myself and Joelle, and we'll be happy to keep you amused, hopefully at least.
We do what we can.
Yeah. So that's it, listeners. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychhealthandsafety.com.